structure and also compare their DNA. What you then can find out is that actually the whales are a group of animals from what they call the even-toed ungulates. So those are the animals that like cattle, camels, antelopes, all those animals, and they were part of that group. But at some point in their history, they moved back from the land into the sea and developed the shapes and the sizes that they are now. So there's actually quite researchers in Ohio that have been researching an extinct deer that allegedly is closer to the whales than the hippo is, and that might very well be. If with more research becoming available and more data, then it's always possible that what we think now is the closest one, there might actually we find one that's even in between them, and that might be closer. But at the moment, certainly of all the currently living groups of animals, as far as we know, the hippos and the whales. I hope you find that an interesting answer. I certainly did, and it's always amazes me that once you start digging into things, you always come upon surprises, and it's a bit like the elephant and the rock hyrax being related. Who would guess if you wouldn't really research it? So yeah, that's last week's viewer challenge question. Maybe challenge is a nice short for challenge question. But let's move on to this week's episode. We came upon the kudu carcass that had been seen on the game drive a couple of days before, and when it was seen on the drives, the leopards were there. But when I visited yesterday morning, there was no sign of any leopard, and the vultures were arriving, which actually is quite a fascinating spectacle. Vultures eating from a carcass, because there's a lot to it actually. That there's a very clear pecking order between the different species of arrive is quite fascinating in that sense. But before I explain a little bit more about that, I think I'm just going to introduce you to the main characters, the main vultures that were present there, and I'll show you a video, and then after the video I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Maybe even I'll mention a couple of things during the video. Okay, so vulture restaurant, that's actually a term that is sometimes used where there's a carcass, then all the vultures of the different species. There are not too many places around where they can find carcasses and food. So sometimes farmers that are, let's say, conservation minded, or like for instance, I know from Holo, the rehabilitation center close by here, if there are animals that they cannot save, then they put the carcass in such a spot where at least the vultures and the marabou storks can benefit from it. And putting offal and carcass out like that in a vulture restaurant. One of the vultures that was present, you can't see me now. Present at that time was the white-backed vulture, which is actually the most common vulture in this area. It's one of the bigger vultures, and it typically arrives at the carcass secondly. I'll also explain a bit more about that. And it's a very aggressive and quite a strong vulture. As you look at it, carcasses. Latin name, or scientific name. In Dutch we always say Latijnse naam, so that's why I'm calling it Latin name instead of scientific name. Is Gyps africanus, which actually comes from Greek and basically just means African vulture. So that's quite straightforward. The second one that was at the carcass at the time was the hooded vulture. That's a much smaller vulture, and one that typically arrives to eat last. You can also see it has quite a different bill structure, much less robust and strong. But being smaller and being thinner, it has the ability, it can reach into places between the bones where other vultures can't reach. That sounds a bit like a commercial, but no, I've lost my train of thought. And also you can see that the thin bill, actually that's why they call it often the toothpick vulture, because it cleans off the bones when all the other vultures. Name, Necrocyrtus monachus. Actually, Necrocyrtus means dragging a corpse, and monachus means with a hood or monk. As you can see from that the back of the neck, that's where it's got its name from. With that small introduction, let's go and watch the video for a little bit. As I said, as we arrived, there were already vultures at the carcass, but there's quite a lot of interaction always going on when vultures eat. At the time we got there, the main part of the carcass, most of it was already eaten. It was mostly what was left was some intestine parts, which is also why the hooded vulture arrived, because they are typically live off the scraps that the other vultures tend to leave. This is one of the white-backed vultures. Actually, they're beautiful birds, well adapted to their lifestyle. There I found another fresh piece of meat, well, not actually meat, but as you can see probably from a distance, this is what is here is the stomach and the digestive tract of all the partially digested and undigested grass that the kudu had been eating over here. And again, here that's typical hooded vulture. They take off a little piece, walk away with it, and then hope that they can eat it before the bigger vultures get smart. Just look how these vultures land. It's very graceful. This is a hooded vulture landing. By the time we left, about 15-20 minutes later, there was really absolutely, it was lying there. And again, you can see the hooded vulture getting a little piece and then walking off with it. Typically, if you have a carcass like that, the bigger vultures arrive first. They tear open the carcass and letting the softer parts. Now here you have another wave of vultures arriving. As you can see, there were lots of vultures already at the carcass, but now suddenly a new group of vultures arrives, and that's something that's typical for vultures, and it's also one of the things that in the end led to some local beliefs that vultures are able to predict the future. And the reason for that is that let me just first let you watch this finish. Yeah, and I'm back. So I'm actually going to tell you the way vultures find the carcass, because as you can imagine, even if you soar high up in the air, it's quite difficult. So what vultures do, they keep an eye out for other birds, for bateleurs, for kites that go down and sit on the carcass, or sometimes they even keep an eye on where the lions are going or the hyenas, and that way they find the carcass. So if you have a group of vultures, a flock of vultures circling over a carcass, and then suddenly all of them go down, there will be other groups of vultures that are circling maybe a couple of kilometers further west or east or in another direction. And they also keep an eye on the other circles of vultures that are flying close by them. If suddenly they see all the vultures go down, they think, hey, there's something going on, there's some food there. And they start moving in that direction to follow the vultures that are going down and also to feed on the same carcass. And that's why vultures start arriving in waves, because the first group of vultures comes, they eat, and then a couple of minutes later, the group of vultures that saw the first group go down will also swoop down, almost like a chain effect, where even vultures that are further away, they suddenly see all these vultures that were circling moving in one direction, and they know, hey, they are going somewhere, and they will start following them. So then a couple of minutes later, the next wave arrives. And this can go on 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 waves of vultures. They can come from, in the end it can be from 100 kilometers away. And that is now how the vultures got their, well, the people believe that they can predict the future.